All right. Chapter 9 The Coming of Brutus. The coming of Brutus, the Trojan, in 1103 BC is the first authenticated arrival of a known body of people in England. For 1,000 years previously, his kinsmen, the Aryan Phoenicians, had settled in the Western Isles, but besides their stone monuments and their names, we have only traditional record of them. As the Phoenician language had no vowels, Brutus is only another form of Barat or British, the Covenant man, as explained in our 5th chapter. The story of Brutus and his royal line is the greatest romance of all history, ancient and modern, as we shall see before we finish this book. For the beginning of that story, we have to go back to the 38th chapter of Genesis, which gives us a not very inspiring account of the doings of Judah and the peculiar circumstances under which his two sons, Zerah and Pharez, were born. Yet God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform, and often he uses the depravity of men to accomplish his own purpose. From the ignoble union of Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar came the line of Judah Pharez that was to bring forth the kings of the house of David and the Messiah, and the line of Judah Zara that has furnished the world with kings until this day. In Genesis 38:27 to 30, we find recorded the birth of those twin sons of Judah. And it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she traveled that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. And she said, how hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharez. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zara. The circumstances connected with the birth of the twins may appear at first sight a coincidence, yet if we review them in the light of the destiny that has followed the descendants of those twins, we can but see in them the hand of the Almighty. As Judah was the royal family of Israel, and the midwife apparently knew that twins were to be born, it was essential that the law of primogeniture be strictly observed, and the firstborn be definitely marked, as he would be the heir apparent. Around the first hand that presented itself, she fastened a scarlet thread, yet that hand was withdrawn, and the other child was born first. Him she named Pharez, i.e., a breach, and the other one Zara, which is variously translated as seed or sunrise. With the line of Pharez, Hezron, Jesse, scripture deals, its descendants are traced from 1 Chronicles 2:9 and onward, and we shall return to them in chapter 12. We are concerned for the present only with the line of Judah Zerah. 1 Chronicles 2:6 gives Zerah's sons as Zimri, Ethan, Heman, Calcol, and Dara. Evidently, those boys occupied a prominent station in life and became renowned for their wisdom, which almost matched that of Solomon's. For we read in 1 Kings 4:31 concerning Solomon, for he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, and Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all nations round about. Notice that Dara is here called Darda. Of the first three names, history and scripture lose sight, except that the names of Heman and Ethan appear at the headings of the 88th and 89th Psalms. But of Calcol and Darda, history and tradition inform us that they carried on the line of the scarlet thread until this day. That scarlet thread has become a byword with us. Every one of us refer to it at times when we speak of red tape, yet very few know of the origin of that phrase. This scarlet thread of Zara, the red branch of Irish history, we shall follow in chapter 12. With Darda alone we are concerned in this chapter. Darda is called Dardanus by Josephus or Darius by various Trojan genealogies. It was he who founded the city and kingdom of Troy 34 years before the exodus of Israel. Let's see. The Dardanelles still commemorates his name. Yes, even one of the Turkish forts on the Asiatic side of the Dardanelles is named Dardanus. As the Exodus took place in 486 BC, both by scriptural and Egyptian data, the founding of Troy, therefore, must have occurred in 1520 BC at the latest. The Windsor Castle MS genealogy and the ancient Icelandic Langvafagadal, as quoted by Sharon Turner and the Reverend W.M.H. Milner, give the descendants of Dardanus as Erectitonius, Tros, Ilus, Laomedian, Priam, Hector, Astyanax, and Polydor, according to Aristo's Orlando Furioso and Anderson's Royal Genealogies, as quoted by Reverend Milner. To the readers of Homer's Iliad, the names of Priam, king of Troy, and Hector are familiar figures. Tros, the grandson of Dardanus, had a second son, Assaracus. His descendants were Capys, and Anchius, and Aeneas, another Trojan hero. At this stage of our narrative, it is well to draw attention to the fact that as Darda or Dardanus was one of the 5 sons of Zerah, who again was one of the twin sons of Judah, besides Shelah, we can rightfully say that Darda's descendants represent, therefore, a large percentage of the tribe of Judah, none of which ever entered the land of Palestine. In chapter 12, we shall refer to the descendants of Calcol, representing another branch of the tribe of Judah. A large portion of Judah are therefore descended from those 2 men. A study of Reverend Milner's genealogical chart will show that most of the royal houses of Europe and the multitudinous lines that have branched off from them in the course of over 3,000 years are of the tribe of Judah, and none of them are Jews. Judah is a lion's whelp, said the dying Jacob. Every noble house of Europe that has a lion on its coat of arms is descended from that line. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. To Judah belonged the scepter, and the sons of Judah have held a good many scepters, ruling over the descendants of the other 12 tribes. So far, we are not yet dealing with the line of Pharez that entered Palestine, from which descended the Jews after the division of Solomon's kingdom, and the house of David, which ended in its temporal rule in Palestine with Jehoiachin and Zedekiah in 585 BC. The fall of Troy is said to have taken place 1183 BC, as given by Eratosthenes of Alexandria, and Apollodorus, as quoted by L.G.A. Roberts in his British History traced from Egypt and Palestine. The escape of Aeneas with his son Ascanius to Italy and the subsequent story of the adventures of his great-grandson Brutus are related to us in the old British chronicles. These are handed down to us through Latin translations made by the Christian British scholars, Gildas Albanius of the 5th century A.D., Nennius of the 9th century, and Bishop Geoffrey of Monmouth, who lived about 1150 A.D. Our exact quoted is Geoffrey's version, translated from the Latin into English by A. Thompson of Oxford in 1718 A.D., and reproduced by J. Giles into modern English. Our text is taken from Professor Waddell's book and includes, in brackets, Professor Waddell's explanations. After the Trojan War, Aeneas, fleeing with an Ascanius from their destroyed city, sailed to Italy. There he was honorably received by King Latinus, which raised against him the envy of Turnus, king of the Rutuli. who thereon made war against him. Engaging in battle, Ananias got the victory and killing Turnus obtained the kingdom of Italy, Latinum, and with it Lavinia, the daughter of Latinus. After his death, Ascanius, succeeding to the kingdom, built Alba on the Tiber and begat a son named Silvius, who took to wife a niece of Lavinia, and had a son called Brutus. At length, after 15 years were expired, the youth accompanied his father in hunting and killed him accidentally by the shot of an arrow. Upon his father's death, he was expelled from Italy, his kinsmen being enraged at him for so heinous a deed. Thus banished, he went into Greece, where he found the posterity of Helenus, son of Priamus, kept in slavery by Pandarosus, king of the Greeks. For after the destruction of Troy, Pyrrhus, son of Achilles, had brought hither in chains Helenus and many others, and to revenge on them the death of his father, had commanded that they be held in captivity. Brutus, finding they were by descent his old countrymen, took up his abode among them and began to distinguish himself by his conduct and bravery in war, so as to gain the affection of kings and commanders, and above all the young men of the country. His fame spreading over all countries, the Trojans from all parts began to flock to him, desiring under his command to be freed from subjection to the Greeks. There was then in Greece a noble youth named Assaracus, a favorer of their cause, for he was descended on his mother's side from the Trojans. Brutus, having reviewed the number of his men and seen how Assaracus's castles lay up open to him, compiled with their request. It is then related that Brutus fought a battle with the army of Pandarosus at the river Achelon, and eventually routed the enemy and captured the king, and extracted from the latter his consent for the Trojans to depart from Greece, provided with the ships and provisions necessary for this purpose, and gold and silver, as well as the hand of his beautiful daughter Ignog for Brutus. He, Pandarosus, accordingly delivered to the Trojans 324 ships laden with all kinds of provisions and gold and silver, and married his daughter to Brutus. The Trojans, now released from his Pandarosus's power, set sail. The winds continued fair for 2 days and a night together, when at length they arrived at a certain island called Logos, the modern Leucas, about 35 miles south of the Acheron River of Epirus, which had been formerly wasted by pirates and was then uninhabited. In it was a desolate city in which they found a temple of Diana, and in it a statue of that goddess, which gave answers to those that came to consult her. Then they advised their leader to go to the city, and after offering sacrifices, to inquire of the deity of the place what country was allotted to them for their place of settlement. So that Brutus, attended by Geron the augur, and 12 of his oldest men, set forward to the temple, arrived at the place, and presenting themselves before the shrine with garlands about their brows, as the ancient rites required, they made 3 fires to the 3 deities, Jupiter, Mercury, and Diana, and offered sacrifices to each of them. Brutus himself, holding before the altar of the goddess a consecrated vessel filled with wine and the glued of a white hart, prayed, "Goddess of woods, tremendous in the chase, to the mountain boars and all the savage race, wide o'er the ethereal walks extend thy sway, and o'er the infernal mansions void of day. Look upon us on earth, unfold our fate, and say what region is our destined seat. There shall we next thy lasting temples raise, and choirs of virgins celebrate thy praise." After repeating this prayer, he took 4 turns round the altar, poured the wine into the fire, and then laid himself down upon the hart's skin, which he had spread before the altar, where he fell fast asleep. In the night, in his deep sleep, the goddess seemed to appear before him and thus responded. Brutus, there lies beyond the Gallic bounds an island which the western sea surrounds. And I screw it up. My giants once possessed, now few remain to bar thy entrance or obstruct thy reign. To reach that happy shore thy sails employ, their fate decrees to raise a second Troy, and found an empire in thy royal line, which time shall ne'er destroy nor bounds confine. Awakened by the vision, they set sail again, and after a course of 30 days came to Africa. From thence they came to the Philenian altars, volcanic sunken rocks east of Carthage, and to a place called Salene, Port Salenius in southwest corner of Sicily, and sailed between Ruscaria, which is Ras City, Ali el Meki, Cape at what was later Carthage Bay, and the mountains of Azara, the Azara Mountains in Algeria, where they underwent great dangers from pirates, whom they nevertheless vanquished and captured their rich booty. From thence, passing the river Mala, that's Madi Malay, west of Oran, forming the east frontier of Morocco, they arrived at Mauritania, Morocco, where, for want of provisions, they had to go ashore. When they had well stored their ships, they steered to the Pillars of Hercules and came to the Tyrrhenian Sea, Gulf of the Tyrrheno-Phoenician city of Gades or Cadiz. Upon its shores they found for several clans descended from the banished Trojans who were accompanied, the Trojan Phoenician, Atenor, in his flight. The name of their commander was Duke Corinius, a modest man in council, but of great courage and boldness, who could overthrow even gigantic opponents. When they learned from whom he was descended, they joined company with him and those under his government, who, from the name of their leader, were afterwards called the Cornish people. We omit the next paragraph, which deals with Brutus's adventures in Aquitaine, where he met with reverses. Brutus, afflicted to observe the number of his forces daily lessening, while that of the enemy increased, at last determined to return to his ships while the greater part of his followers was yet safe and hitherto victorious, and to go in quest of the island the goddess had told him of. So, with the consent of his company, he repaired the fleet, and loading it with riches and spoils he had taken, set sail with a fair wind to the promised land, and arrived on the coast of Totnus. The islands, or island, was then called Albion, and was inhabited by a few giants. Notwithstanding this, the pleasant places, plenty of rivers, abounding in fish, and its pleasing woods made Brutus and his company desirous to fix their habitation in it. They therefore passed through all the provinces, forced the giants to fly into the caves of the mountains, and divided the country among them according to the directions of their commander. After this, they began to till the ground and build houses, so that in a little time the country looked like a place long inhabited. At last, Brutus called the island after his own name, Britain, and his companions Britons, from whence afterwards the language of his nation, which at first bore the name of Trojan, Doric, or rough Greek, was called British. But Corinius, in imitation of his leader, called that part of the island which was given to him as Duke Corinia, and his people Corine, Cornish men, after his own name. For though he had his choice of provinces before all the rest, yet he preferred this country, Cornwall, which is now called in Latin Cornubia, for it was a diversion to him to encounter the said giants. It was a diversion to him to encounter the said giants, which were in greater numbers there than in all the other provinces. Hold on. Brutus, having thus at last set eyes upon his kingdom, formed the design of building a city, and with this view traveled through the land to find a convenient site. And coming to the river Thames, he walked along the shore and at last pitched upon a place fit for his purpose. Here he built a city which he called New Troy, under which name it continued for a long time after, till at last, by corruption, it came to be called Trinovantium. Trinovantum. But afterwards, when Lud, the brother of Cicebalion, who made war against Julius Caesar, obtained the government of the kingdom, he surrounded it with stately walls and towers and ordered it to be called after his own name, Caerlud, that is, the city of Lud. After Brutus had finished building the city, he made choice of the citizens who were to inhabit it and prescribed them laws for their peaceable government. At the same time, also, the sons of Hector, after the expulsion of the posterity of Antenor, reigned in Troy, as in Italy did Silvius Aeneas, the son of... As in Italy did Silvius Aeneas, the son of Aeneas, the uncle of Brutus, and the third king of the Latins. During these events, Brutus had, by his wife Egnog, 3 famous sons named Locrin, Albanact, and Camber. These, after their father's death, which happened in the 24th year after his arrival, buried him in the city which he had built, and then, having divided the kingdom of Britain, excepting Cornwall among them, retired each of his government. Locrin, the eldest, possessed the central part of the island, called afterwards from his name Logria. Camber had that part which lies beyond the river Severn, now called Wales, but which was for long named Cambria, and hence the people still call themselves in their British tongue Cambry. Albanact, the younger brother, possessed the country he called Albania, now Scotland. Such is the account that the old British chronicles give us of the adventurous coming of Brutus to Albion, naming the country after himself, Brutusland, or Land of the Brits, Brit-Aeon, which we have seen means in the Phoenician Covenant land, as explained in a previous chapter. As mentioned previously, the coming of Brutus and also the historicity of the old British chronicles have been made light of and even rejected by modern critics. Yet the testimony of several ancient British monuments, coins, and other substantial evidences, as shown by Professor Waddell, establish the coming of Brutus as well as the other rejected details of the British chronicles as reliable history. When reading our extract of the British Chronicles, allowances have to be made for the fancies of the ancient, primitive, and romantic minds to have their play, as, for instance, the vision of Brutus at the temple of Diana. The later goddess is, as shown by Waddell, a Grecian form of the tutelary goddess Britannia, to whom the ancient Phoenicians appealed for good luck, hence the Roman form of Fortuna. As the account states, Diana appeared to Brutus only in a dream. Diana's or Britannia's answer and prophetic blessing we have to accept in the light of what has hitherto been told and what will further be disclosed in these chapters as a paganized version of the prophecies relating to the destiny and mission of God's covenant people, Israel, the Bharat Phoenicians of the monuments and inscriptions, the British or Celto-English-Saxon race of the latter days. Regarding the rejection of the old British chronicles by the critics as nothing but mythology, Professor Waddell writes in his 13th chapter, the ancient tradition was thus handed down in writing from generation to generation by the Britons, who, we shall find, were familiar with writing long before their arrival in Britain. And as usual, it would be modernized from time to time into the vernacular of the period by later transcribers, just as modern writers modernized Chaucer and the early versions of the Arthur legend. This tradition was universally regarded as genuine history down till about a century ago. The Brut or Brutus tradition was current in early Welsh bardic literature and formed a class styled the Bruts, including Lyamons, and Geoffrey's version was a mine from which our great poets and dramatists have drawn materials and inspiration for many of their romances on British life in the pre-Roman period, such as Shakespeare's King Lear and Cymbeline. The arbitrary rejection of these traditional ancient British chronicles as a source of pre Roman British history by modern writers since about a century ago is based upon a kind of objection and mere dogmatic assertion, which, if applied to early Greek and Roman history and to the Old Testament tradition, would equally entail their total rejection also. Nor is the alleged objection that there is no classic Greek or Roman reference to the name of King Brutus, even were it true, which it is not, sufficient grounds for rejecting the circumstantial British tradition regarding him. There is no classic reference to the Aryan ancestors of the historical Greeks, nor to the names of the other descendants of Aeneas that, Homer states, revisited and reoccupied Troy in the dark period following its sack and destruction by the Achaeans. Nor is there any classic Greek or Roman reference to any of the Jewish patriarchs, prophets, and kings, or even to the Hebrews themselves. Professor Waddell's testimony, as given above, is the result of many years' study, both in the East and in Europe, where he had been busy collecting the inscriptional evidence upon which his conclusions are based. Unfortunately, however, Professor Waddell's attitude towards sacred scripture does not seem to be very reverential, as he is possessed, like most people, with that common malady, the Jewish complex. He is unaware of the true history and destiny of Israel, calling them the Jews, and therefore he is oblivious to the fact that his Barat Phoenicians and most of his Katai Phoenicians were none other than the seagoing Israelites, who became the great colonizing race of the world, the carriers of the Aryan civilization to Britain and other parts of Europe, and who in our era were destined to be the propagators of Christianity and all it has meant to mankind. The place of the landing of Brutus in Albion is stated to have been Tutnus, in the sound of the Dart of Devon, and it is in keeping with the fateful fitness of things that the first harbor selected by the great Admiral Brutus and his early Phoenician Britons for their first British fleet in Albion's waters should have laterally been the favorite resort of the British sea dog, Sir Walter Raleigh, and be the locations of the Britannia training ship for our navy of the modern Empire of Britain. There still exists at Tutnus, on the foreshore street, the traditional stone called Brutus Stone, which I have seen, not me personally, but the author, with the local tradition that upon it Brutus first set foot when landing in Albion. What else? Mr. E. O. Gordon, in his book Prehistoric London, page 108, tells us, "It is at Tutnus, on the Dart, 12 miles inland from Torbay, the oldest seaport in South Devon, that we find the surest proof of the personality of Brutus in a custom handed down from time immemorial and last observed May 6, 1910, when the mayor read the proclamation of King George standing upon a granite boulder of the principal street, 4th Street, leading up the steep ascent from the river to the west gate of the town. Over this venerable relic hangs a sign inscribed, 'This is Brutus's stone,' the tradition being that on this stone the Trojan prince set foot when he landed in Britain some few years after the fall of Troy, 1185 BC. The giants which Brutus encountered in large numbers, as told in the chronicles, were no doubt the early Aryans who, under the leadership of Hu Gadarn, reached the Western Isles almost 1,000 years previous. The people who piled up the ancient mounds and erected the circles and other megalithic monuments. It is very likely that these early inhabitants opposed the occupation of their homeland by the newcomers. The very fact that the ancient name of Landen for London prevailed instead of Cair Troia or Trinovantum seems to verify it. The Welsh records disagree somewhat with the chronicles and claim that Brutus was proclaimed king at a national convention, very likely after he had conquered the earlier occupants of the land, and that his three sons were named after the three Pacific tribes of the Cymry: Locrinus after Lograia, England; Camber after Cambria, Wales; and Albon after Albania, Scotland. Was then the old English poet Spenser only romancing when he said, "Noble Britons sprung from Trojans bold"? And Drayton, the Elizabethan poet, "Isle of the Albion highly blessed, with giants lately stored, where from the stock of Troy those puissant kings should rise, whose conquest from the west the world should scant suffice." Milton also believed in the story of the Trojan founding of London, as shown by the words, "O city, founded by Dardanian hands, whose towering front the circling realm commands." Another memory of the Trojan colonization is perpetuated in the numerous Troy towns or mazes cut in the turf in all parts of England and in those which still exist in the uplands of Wales, called by the shepherds Cardoroia. Sierra Doria? Can't say that word. Caerdroia. The city of Troy, allusion to which is made in Drych y Prif Osyd and in other Welsh histories. There is nothing more popular among the Welsh, we are told, than the belief that they came originally into the island from Cardroia. This tradition has impressed itself so indelibly on the Celtic mind that we even see shepherds on the summit of every hillock, making pictorial representations in the surface of the grass of the labyrinthine walls of ancient Troy. On the plains of both sides of the Solway, mazes are also to be met with, and as in Wales, herdsmen still cut labyrinthine figures upon the turf, which they call for no reason except that their fathers used the same expression, the walls of Troy. Whether the name of Troy town was used generically for all turf-cut mazes, it is impossible to say, but it is certain that many of them in different parts of the country were designated, and both in name and in form take us back to classical antiquity. Even around London, the name survives. For example, at Peckham Rye, an old row of cottages built on the site which formed part of the common is called Troy Town. The upper garden at Kensington was known as the Siege of Troy. It was on this site William III laid out his topiary maze, and about the same time he restored Henry VIII's popular maze at Hampton Court, which that monarch may have probably founded upon a yet earlier maze of unknown antiquity. Gordon. Brutus is celebrated in the Triads as one of the three king revolutionists of Britain. He was also Great Britain's original lawgiver, introducing the common law that has been the foundation of British or Saxon liberty ever since. Lord Chief Justice Cope affirms the original laws of this land were composed of such elements as Brutus's first selected from the ancient Greek and Trojan institutions. Lord Chancellor Fortescue, in his work on the laws of England, observes, concerning the different powers which kings claim over their subjects, "I am firmly of the opinion that it arises solely from the different nature of the original institutions. So the kingdom of Britain had its original from Brutus of the Trojans, who attended him from Greece and Italy, and wove a mixed government compounded of the regal and the democratic. In the settlement of our country, very often villages, towns, rivers, and countries derived their names from the first family that came, or from the place they had left behind in the old country. In this way, we will be able to trace English, German, Dutch, French, Swedish, and Spanish immigrations to our shores in centuries to come, even if all records of their coming have been lost. Certain country, river, and town names in Old Virginia will indicate forever that its first settlers were English, and likewise in New York and Pennsylvania, the early Dutch immigrants left indelible records of their coming. Wherever there is a Williamsburg, we may be sure that there is a William connected with it. So also did Brutus and his Brits leave the evidence of their settlement of Britain in their place names. Starting from New Troy or London, we find Barat names radiating through the countries of England, particularly along the ancient so-called Roman roads, which, however, were not Roman, but of still earlier British origin, although the Romans get the credit. The so-called Roman roads bearing the old Britain names of Stane Street, Walting Street, Erming Street, etc., are studded with ancient Britain town sites, as we shall see, and thus presumably were roads mentioned in the early British chronicles, which were engineered by the ancient Britons in the pre-Roman period and merely repaired by the Romans, to whom they are now altogether credited by those latter-day writers who have erroneously believed that the Britons were savages. Waddell. Starting in a westerly direction from London, we find in Kent Barat place names such as Bedhurst near Kitts, Cottey Dolman, and the Roman Watling Street, Borden on Watling Street near Milton, Britterden in Sussex, Burton with prehistoric boroughs near the Roman Stane Street, Brighton with old stone and bronze age remains and Britain coins, in Hants, Brittenden, Barion with prehistoric remains, Burriton with prehistoric earthworks, Brading on the Brading Downs, in Wiltshire, Braddon Forest, Burton, Britford of Avon with prehistoric camps and Stone Age remains, Brayton, or is it Bryon, on Salisbury Plain with prehistoric boroughs, Porton near Stonehenge with numerous graves of early Britain kings of the Bronze Age, in Dorsetshire, Britport or Bruteport, Bridehead with prehistoric boroughs, Bradford near Dorchester on Roman Road in Devonshire, Baryon north of Dartmoor, Bradford on Dartmoor with Cromlech, Brideford in Cornwall. Cromlech, Brideford in Cornwall, Bartine in St. Just Parish with stone circles, Pryden near St. Buryan with Menhire, Braddock with prehistoric interments. Hold on. Give me a second. Oh, yeah, this is a long chapter. The Severn Valley was another early avenue of British civilization, and its Welsh bank remained largely free from Roman domination. There was located the ancient capital of the British kings and the seat of an arch-druid, Caerleon on the Usk. On the south is Somerset, or the seat of the Somers or Kimries. The western promontory at the southern mouth is Hercules Point, the Heracles Akron of Ptolemy, or modern Hartland Point. The upper Severn rises in Montgomery, which names seem to be derived from Mount Gomer or Mount of the Cymry or Somers. In the Severn Valley, we have another series of Barat names. In Somerset, Parrot River, on which is located the Isle of Avalon of sacred fame. I think that's Burton. It looks like an I, but I'm going to say Burton. Burton Pinsent near Taunton Abbey with prehistoric earthworks. Bratton east of Cadbury with ancient camps. Priddy with numerous prehistoric boroughs. Birth with Bronze Age remains. In Gloucestershire, Bristol, the ancient Saer Brit. Bredon Hill in Worcester. Parrot on Bredon at the mouth of the Avon. Bredicott in Monmouth. Berden River of Caerleon of Iskra on the Usk. In Glamorgan, Britain Ferry. In Montgomery, Brython Hills on Upper Severn. Professor Waddell gives in his interesting book, from which these names are taken, many more British place names of Barat origin. The professor also shows that a good many rivers, particularly in the south of England, have been named by the Phoenicians after the rivers and towns of their eastern home. He says, certain it is, I find that the majority of the chief river names, from the Totnes to the Thames, including the latter river name itself, are clearly transplanted namesakes from the rivers of Epirus, whence Brutus sailed, and rivers of Troy and Phoenicia. These Phoenician, Epirus, and Trojan names were presumably bestowed therein by Brutus or his early descendants, just as a similar series of such names has been applied to the Cornwall coast to the west of Totnes, and just as modern British colonists transplant the cherished name of their old homeland to their new colonies. Similarly, from Totnes to the Thames, the coast is studded with such Asia Minor and Hellenic names. The next large river on the way to the Thames is the modern Exe, called by the Romans under its old British names of Iska, also written Ska, which presumably preserved the old sacred name of the river of Troy, the Scamander or Exanthus. That the front name Ska was a separate and superadded name, and possibly a contraction of Ascanios, seems evident from the modern river being called merely Mender. From the Scamander, or Scamandros, of Homer, was presumably called Ascanios. This title, therefore, of Iska for the Exe appears to disclose the Trojan source of the name of the numerous favorite residential rivers in Britain called Esk, Usk, Exe, etc. Thus, the river at the site of the Britain King Arthur's capital of Caerleon in Monmouth was called Iska by the Romans, the modern Usk. And just as there are several Eska, Eski, Usk, and Exe rivers in Britain bearing this favorite name, so there were others in the Troad and Thrace. Hold on. Man. Yeah, I think that's a good stop. It's good. That's a good spot. Looks like it's jumping in to something new. That's it. I promise.